Live. Hello and welcome everybody to this week's episode of our Agile TD webinar. And today, our guest speaker is Ashley here on the other side of the screen. Hi. We are very thankful that she has some time for us today, and we're really looking forward to this topic. It's very interesting and something we haven't had for a while. So, Ashley, thanks. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So before we start, as always, just a few announcements to what's up in the Agile Testing Day universe. As you all know, we are very busy with preparing our online conference, which is crazy because so much content, and it's going to be so cool. So if you are interested in it, if you want to know, how the whole thing works, please just contact us or go to the website, check it out. It's going to be pretty awesome thing, and we're pretty excited to have you there in November. The next webinar we'll have in 2 weeks on August 26th with Santosh Tupad. He's a long-term Agile TD speaker, and he will be talking about security testing, and his talk is called The Hacker Mindset Before Toolset. So he will show you his hacker moves, and you should definitely tune in and sign up for it, and then we'll see us there, hopefully. Yes, so that's for the announcements. Then just for everybody who might not be familiar with this tool, this is Crowdcast. And as you can see on the right-hand side, there's a chat going on. You can just say hi, where you're from. This is always pretty interesting to see where people are tuning in from. So would be nice. If you have a question, however, please go to the Ask a Question box, which is in the middle of the screen somewhere in the black area. And just post a question, or if there's a question in there already that you think is important, you can upvote for it. And then after the session is done, we will do the Q&A with Ashley and then get to all your answers, hopefully. All right, and after the webinar is done, the replay will be available within 20 seconds. So you can have a watch after that, go back to some questions and check it out. And I think that's pretty much it for the Crowdcast. We hope you enjoy it. Also, we want to thank our sponsor for today, who is EY, and they are so kind to still sponsor us for the Agile Testing Days this year. So thanks for sticking with us in these crazy times. And now to Ashley. We found Ashley in the internet, as many others. No, actually, she's been a recommendation by a friend of ours, and we are really happy to have her here. Her name is Ashley Janelle, and she runs her own business. She's a UX and UI designer, lots of experience, many projects, I believe, and she is also the founder of the UX Bootcamp. So you can actually, with her, learn UX within 16 weeks. And you can find out about all of that on her website, ashleyjanelle.com. I think the whole links will be down here in the chat. So check out her awesome work. Maybe she can help you get into UX. She has a lot of freebies on her website as well. Great information. So I think enough said, except for please obey the code of conduct. Otherwise, we will throw you out. So in short, it just says be nice. Don't say anything stupid in the chat, please. And yes, please ask questions if you want. You can start now, and we'll get to them after the webinar. So people, I hope you all enjoy it. I will definitely do. And Ashley, I would just give the stage to you now. Thanks again, and then start your thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for that introduction. As mentioned, I'm Ashley Janelle, UX UI designer. And if you are here to learn more about UX and Agile development process, you are in the right place. But first, I just want to say thank you to Agile Testing Days for having me. This is awesome. Very excited to talk to your audience and, just really share my expertise with your platform. So thank you so much again. Today we're going to be talking about how to best work with an Agile development team as a UX designer. I'm going to be specifically in parts talking to aspiring UX designers, new UX designers, because one of the things that I hear hear a lot, one of the concerns as people start to dive into UX, start to work on their portfolios, is like, wait, there's this other element of working with development teams that I don't have any experience with, being a new designer. So we're going to talk about that. So let's jump right in. So before we get started, I just want to kind of give a little bit of background about myself and let you guys know kind of why I'm qualified to talk to you guys about this today. So like I mentioned, my name is Ashley Janelle. I'm a UX UI designer at Caterpillar Incorporated. I am from Chicago. I live in Chicago. I am also, as mentioned, the coach and the creator of Learn UX Online in 16 Weeks. It's an online boot camp where we take you from beginner to experience level in just 16 weeks. It's been a really successful program. I get the chance to talk to a lot of amazing people from different industries, different backgrounds, who are wanting to make the transition into UX. So that's been really, really exciting. And I've just been really blessed by that. And I'll talk a little bit more about, I'll kind of be weaving in a lot of the things that I've learned from my aspiring UX designers into this webinar. So maybe you guys can kind of relate to some of those. For education, for me, I have a bachelor's in interactive arts and media from Columbia College, Chicago. So that's just a fancy way of saying a degree in web design and graphic design, and a little bit of game design and a little bit of coding, kind of, whatever you had interest in. For me, it was web and graphic design. And like a lot of designers who had, bachelor's degrees, I went and I did some web design work and some graphic design work, but really realized after working for a while that I really wanted more out of my career. So I went and pursued UX, and kind of the rest is history. Past roles for me prior to Caterpillar, I did some visual design work at Redbox, as well as some graphic design work at Motorola Solutions. So if you have any questions about roles as well, or which role is for you, or kind of the difference between several different job titles, we can definitely talk about that at the end as well. So again, like I mentioned, I do a lot of coaching, a lot of teaching, a lot of mentoring, which is really what's prepared me to talk to you guys today. I don't take any of these things lightly. I do a lot of listening along with coaching and teaching. Obviously the coaching with my course, but the teaching, I really like to work with STEM students. So high school students who are really interested in STEM majors. So we do a lot of different things, different projects, different challenges, to really get them equipped with the tools for just really problem solving, and then mentoring with these students as well. So before I begin, I want to share one of the biggest questions that I get from aspiring UX UI designers. There are a ton of them, as you can imagine, but like I mentioned, specifically talking about development processes, I really get this question a lot, and I think it's really important for us to really break down and talk about, is it a requirement for new UX and UI designers to have worked on development teams prior to landing a role? And if you're here, you probably can get a feel for what this answer is going to be, but I just think that it's really important that someone says it. 1 second, let me restart this really quickly. So I think it's really important that someone shares it with you. That it's absolutely not a must for you to have this experience, and no one expects you to. Okay, so I think I really want to kind of, put that out there. It's absolutely not a must. So what is this agile kind of process that UX designers work with development teams? It is a methodology centered around the idea of iterative development. And that's really what we're going to be talking about, is this idea of iteration and doing something over and over again. So the requirements and solutions evolve through collaboration between self-organizing cross-functional teams. So what does all of that mean? Basically, every point, every arrow that you see on this diagram is a part of the process. We're going to talk about that process in just a second, and how they all actually work together to get us a very successful outcome. So for me, it's really been a method that allows us to have shorter releases. And when I say us, I mean my company where I work at Caterpillar, the design teams and the development teams, to have shorter releases in a short period of time. You also have the opportunity to get customer feedback after each release, which is crucial. So if anyone knows anything about UX, you know that one of the most critical points of UX is really getting that user feedback, really getting that, feedback to say, okay, is this working? Do customers even like this? Do they want this? Is what we designed meeting their needs? So that feedback part is really, really important. And then it allows us to be able to quickly incorporate that feedback back into a next release, which could be, 2 weeks later, and, at the kind of shortest amount of time, instead of waiting, let's say, months on months before we actually get to, the end of this cycle, the end of the kind of this review process here, if you will. Getting feedback and testing and developing early and doing it often really gives us a really clear advantage. So one question that you might have for UX designers specifically is, what are we doing at each of these phases? Which I think is really, really important to know, because again, if you are someone who's an aspiring UX designer, you may not have even heard of this agile development process. So one thing that I really want to do is, again, like I mentioned, no one is expecting you to have ever done this before or to have ever, had experience with this, but there are things that you can do to kind of prep yourself to at least kind of know what to expect. And when you actually land a role, you kind of know what to look for and what questions to ask. So you're a little bit ahead of the curve. So we're going to talk about what UX designers are doing at each of these phases. So at the requirements phase, this is when I am understanding the scope of work. So understanding what the ask is, asking all of the questions, doing any additional research that I need to really make sure that I understand. The requirements phase, every phase is crucial, but the requirement phase is very crucial because it really sets the tone for designers. It really sets the tone, well, for everyone, but it sets the tone for the entire process. So how well you understand what's going on, how well you're able to kind of document questions and maybe outstanding points that you need to remember is going to really be crucial at this point. Obviously, then we move into the design part. And this is where I'm typically working with product owners. Product owners are the people on the team who really, essentially own the product, but they're the ones that are typically writing the features or writing the epics, if you will, so that, the designers and everyone knows exactly what we're designing, what the point of this is, why we're all here. Business analysts as well, the people who actually write each feature. So a feature could be, I have a search box. In the search box, I should be able to search for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, various things, but I can't search for, a certain thing. It has basically certain criteria that it lays out very definitively so that the designers know exactly what should be designed to include in that feature. And obviously the developers get all of these epics and these features as well to read, so that when they're actually developing, they can kind of tie all of that back to what the designers have designed. So working with the product owners and business analysts to ensure that all features are designed in the way that they were intended in each story. So stories are basically comprehensive versions of the features. So instead of just, kind of really clear cut saying I have the search box and I should be able to search for, addresses, maybe cities, zip codes. It really tells a story and how the user is actually going to be using that when they come in. What kind of mindset are they going to be in? What kind of things are they going to be looking to search for? What kind of things might they be looking to search for that they can't search for, and why? So it's really a more comprehensive write-up on the features themselves. And then also getting feedback from my UX UI team on documenting the UI designs, flows, and etc., which we're going to get to in a second. But the really important key here for designers to remember is that when you hand off a design to your development team, so that basically means like, here are all of the screens or what have you that I have designed, I'm handing them over to the development team. You're not just handing over your visuals, right? You are also handing over any documentation that says, here's the search bar and here's how it looks when it is just an icon. Here's what it looks like when I click on it and maybe it expands. Here's what that animation looks like. You are documenting each and every point so that at no time a developer or someone can come back to you and say, hey, I'm not really sure how this is supposed to function. Now, sometimes we miss things, it happens. But as a designer, you want to make sure that you're not just designing these static screens, you're designing any animation that's going to correspond with it. You're documenting that animation. Anything that you think might be a little bit tricky on how it works or how it functions. Maybe you have a side navigation that slides in and out. You want to actually document how that's supposed to happen and when that's supposed to happen, what the triggers are for that. This will be written down by the designers and obviously handed over to the development team. This is crucial because, like I mentioned, and I will mention a little later, designers and developers will meet often during this process, but if you can get ahead of all of these things early, everyone will just be a lot happier, and you'll be a lot more successful in working with development teams. And we'll also talk about kind of how to document and when to document as well. So the next phase is develop. So typically what I'm doing during this stage when things are being developed, they've already been handed off of my plate onto, to the developers. I'm typically moving on to other projects. So moving on to other epics, maybe revisiting previous epics and tweaking design. So again, epics are pretty much, the work and the projects that we're working on. So maybe there's been something that's been developed and now it's been tested, and maybe there was some things that need to be tweaked. So I might be working on those. Also meeting with developers for a clear handoff typically during this process. During the test phase, while the developers are going through and they're testing the designs, I again am still continuing to work on other features and revisiting work that needs to be tweaked, but still obviously there for the development team and anyone else who needs me. And then during the deploy and review portion, which is basically when the development team has completed their scope of work, and now there is an environment and a playground for you to actually go in and click around and see things the way that they are intended to function. That is when I kind of really jump back in and I start really playing around. I'm typically finding bugs, things that aren't working well, things that maybe are not working as they were intended. Sometimes we've designed something and it doesn't quite look right. Maybe there's some color that's off, maybe some fonts are off, maybe design is just kind of maybe jumbled up a little bit. It happens. So really going back and taking notes of any inconsistencies from UI designs. And again, having consistent meetings with those development teams to report these inconsistencies and bugs. So that's going to be really, really crucial. You always want to be checking back every time they say, we've made an update. Can you check this? You really want to make sure that you're going in there with a fine-tooth comb and trying to catch every little thing and being very, very meticulous because that's your job. So we'll go back to the pros, to kind of the process again and talk about some of the pros and cons of this process that I've personally found for myself. So one of the pros is that this method allows us to have the ability to add in new features to upcoming releases. So, because we are doing this cycle that might take, let's say, about 2 weeks sometimes, it allows us to, let's say there's an element that's been tested and we've gotten some feedback on it and we can make a really quick change. We can make that change on our end as the designers, and the developers can probably, sometimes depending on how much work they have, they can get it in really quickly. So this is a really great incentive for kind of going this method, as opposed to some other methods where they have this entire process that might carry out for months and months on end. And then you may not even get to the test phase or the review phase for several months down the road. Also, like I mentioned, testing is done at the end of each release, thus keeping your product always up to date. So we're always hearing good feedback, things that we hadn't thought of, and we're able to kind of put that feedback, like I mentioned, back into the designs. And then all teams, typically like the dev teams, design teams, product owners, have the ability to learn what's worked and what hasn't worked. And this is super important. So let's say you have product owners who are writing new epics, or business owners or business analysts who are writing new features. It really allows them to learn early from the things that maybe didn't work, or maybe the things that went really well. And they're able to really incorporate those learnings into the future features that they read. Again, testing early and often and kind of this very short cycle allows us the opportunity to do that, which really keeps us successful, and it keeps us very current in what we're designing and what's really working with our customers and what's not. So some cons, kind of, you can probably have guessed, timelines typically kind of become a little less definitive. When you're doing shorter releases, sometimes you tend to have more things that get thrown in. And if time is not really, obviously we're all going to be concerned about time, but sometimes you might have a little bit more wiggle room, then this might be a really great method for you. And then obviously, to go along with that, just be prepared for rework as as things change. This is part of my day, kind of the rundown that I just gave here. This is my, as I was putting this together, I was like, wow, this is really my week. I'm doing one of these or many of these every day. And this is pretty much my week every week. I'm in one part of one of these sections. I'm doing something that's listed here. So, it's really about kind of staying in tune with what's going on and really understanding the process so that you understand kind of what to look out for, which we're going to talk about in a second. So when to use this, if you don't have a ton of initial requirements to get started or aren't on a tight timeline. So we've talked about time already, but the initial requirements, so let's say you're building a product from the ground up and you don't have all of your screens already built out, obviously, because you're building this from the ground up. But let's say you do have like a side navigation, maybe you have a top navigation, maybe you know kind of what your overall page structure is going to be, but you don't actually know what's going to be in there. You can have that. If that's defined, you can have that and pass that off to the development team so that they can start working on that. You don't have to wait until everything is pixel perfect and everything is exactly where it's supposed to be and all the content that's going to be on the pages is there. You can hand things off slowly to the development team. That's really the beauty of using this method, as opposed to others where they like the screens to be pretty much final. It just puts a lot more pressure on the teams and also time to actually get those things built out instead of doing things kind of bit by bit. And then again, that goes to my second point. If your team is currently working on a project that doesn't exist today, again, kind of building that product from the ground up, doing it bit by bit really gives you the opportunity to, kind of build as you go and not have to just have a finalized product. And then also, if cost is less of a factor, obviously this, kind of going bit by bit can take a little bit more time. There are more people involved. There are more stages. So if cost is less of a factor and you have, the resources for, whatever comes up, if that's, that you need more developers or designers or what have you, if cost is less of a factor, this would definitely be a great method for you. So again, we're kind of going to jump back to the idea of new designer, new UX designer coming over, really wanting to work as a UX designer, but really kind of hesitant on this process or this idea of working with development teams because there's really no training that we can kind of give you unless you work with a developer prior to, actually getting a job. There's really no training for this. So is there anything that you can do now to prepare to have successful outcomes working with development teams? There are a ton of things that you can do. So let's start here. The first thing that you want to do is be thorough. And I mentioned this before, but in your designs, in your handoff process, in your documentation, make sure that you're thorough. This is something that you don't necessarily have to have previous experience in doing. Make sure that all of your designs are thoughtful. Make sure that you thought through all of the, well, what ifs, what if someone clicks here? Do I have enough room on the page for this drop down? Things like that. Make sure that your handoff process, your documentation is well documented. This kind of goes into number 2 with creating a plan. But in terms of documentation, if your company does not have a documentation process, all you have to do is put a little note with an arrow next to whatever it is that you're referencing on your screen, and just write out a little comprehensive blurb about what it is that you're trying to convey. Again, if you're trying to convey that, the search bar is going to start with an icon, and then when you click on it, it's going to expand to the left. You want to write that out for them. And then you also want to show those different stages. So you're going to show the first stage with the icon. And then once it's clicked, you want to show the stage with the icon with the search bar expanded. Maybe you close it and then maybe it goes back to the little icon. We've all kind of seen that. You want to show those different stages stages. You don't want to just show one. You want to show every different stage and be very clear, because developers can't read our minds. They're only taking kind of what we give them. And we also don't want to leave any room for developers to kind of, make up what they think that we meant, because that's never going to be good for anyone. So the documentation process, if your company doesn't have one, can just be as simple as a little note next to your design. It makes everyone's life a lot easier, and it makes your designs a lot more thorough. Also, you want to create a plan for how all teams will work throughout this process. So once you start at a company, they may already have this in place. They should already have this in place, but make sure that you understand what's expected from everyone and actually stick to it. So the key here is to make sure that you understand the process. Make sure that you understand what everyone's role is throughout that development process, okay? Make sure that you understand what your role is specifically. Make sure that you understand, what you're supposed to be doing at the requirements phase, what you're supposed to be doing at the design phase, how long each of these phases should last. You just really want to make sure that you are on top of what's expected of you. The next thing is going to be to ask questions. And obviously this kind of seems like, yeah, I'll always ask questions, but don't feel like you have to be sure about everything. You're a new designer, you're new to the company. Every person who starts at a new company has to ask about the process, has to ask about how things are done. But you don't have to be sure about everything from a technical aspect, okay? So sometimes, depending on, the teams that you're working with, the development teams that you're working with, the platforms that they're working with, they have technical limitations. And sometimes you can't do certain things on their platforms because it's just outside of the scope of what they can do. So the developers really welcome questions, and the communication makes everyone's lives easier. So if you have a question, I'm building this thing out, is this actually doable? I want to have this crazy animation before I actually go do it. Let me check with the developer and see if it's something that I can actually do, something that our platform can actually handle before you actually go out and start to, spend your time on building it. So the next thing is include the developers early. Okay, so sometimes developers get left out of this process and they come in on the back end, which in a sense makes sense because you're working, to get the product design. So you're working with, again, the product owners and the business analysts and whoever else is on your team, the other designers. But the developers are actually the ones that are going to have to make it work. So it would be in all of our best interest to include them early. Maybe when you get your project to, or whatever it is that you're working on, to a good spot, just bring them in for a short, meeting, nothing formal, and just say, hey, I have this project that I'm working on. It's going to be handed off to you at some point. I just want to, kind of run it by you guys, get your early thoughts, let you guys have a chance to ask any questions. But it also gives them the opportunity, again, like I just mentioned, to say, hey, that you might design, that thing that you might have just designed might be outside of our technical limitations. And then that just saved you a bunch of time, so that you can go back and say, okay, go back to your team or what have you, and rework that before it actually gets to them. It also gives them a chance early to have an understanding of the project's purpose and its intent and the expected functionality. Again, giving them the opportunity to say, hey, that's really cool, or hey, I have some questions about that. And that's always good for everybody, okay? Because it saves everyone time and it gets everyone on the same page. And sometimes we need to push on developers. That's just the honest truth. Sometimes we need to push on them and say, hey, well, what can we do to make this work? So it's not always, we can't do it and then designers have to go back and fix it, but, really having that conversation and opening up everything for dialogue to say, okay, how can we kind of meet in the middle if something, maybe isn't going to work the way that we intended it to? The next thing is to be available, be eager and willing to assist and answer any questions developers have. So like I mentioned, when we get to that stage, well, any stage you're working with developers, but especially when they actually start designing things and they're putting things into motion, be available, this really builds trust, and it lets them know that they can come to you. Sometimes designers and developers tend to work past each other, even though we should be working with each other. But it just really gives you the opportunity to really build a connection with them, instead of waiting till, maybe the next planned meeting. Maybe you guys can just hop on a call really quickly and answer any questions that they have. Just be eager and willing to assist, because again, we're all trying to, get to the same goal. We're all trying to get the project done, and they're developing what you've designed, and you want to make sure that, it's exactly what you intended it to be. And then lastly, adjust quickly. So I talk about this a lot in my course, because I think it's something that for designers we can maybe be a little bit touchy on. But if a developer or even another designer or your manager comes back and says, hey, maybe there's another way we can do this, emotions should be taken out of it. Nothing should be kind of off the table. I always say, leave your emotions out of it. It's not about you. It's about the best interest of the product. So if a developer comes back and says, hey, this is outside of our technical limitations, it can really kill an idea. You have to say, okay, really understand what they're saying, ask for maybe recommendations on things that we can do, and pivot quickly. And that's pretty much all it is. It's not about, it's not an indictment on you or you as a designer. It's just, maybe some things they just can't do. But again, find ways to meet in the middle. And again, like I always say, no emotions involved. So just kind of maybe something to remember as you get put in these certain situations. Sometimes, we kind of have a tendency to design something and want it to be designed and look that way exactly. And sometimes that doesn't always happen, and that's okay. But my imposter syndrome. So I talk a lot about imposter syndrome as well. Imposter syndrome is when you feel like you just can't do something, or you're not smart enough, or, the UX designers that you see online are just so good. They're so, informed. They know everything. I'm just a newbie. I don't know as much as they do. I can't work with development teams. You absolutely can. And the best way, I always say, to get past imposter syndrome, and this is in any arena, any industry, is, to know that everyone has imposter syndrome at one point or another. And the key is to be prepared. So that was kind of my way of, this is kind of my way of giving you a few keys that you can take with you to really apply and think about. Now, again, you might not have as much context as you would like for a lot of the things that I just mentioned, but you can play back this presentation, take some notes, and really just, I always say, when I always tell my students, take notes on everything that I'm telling you. And once you get to that new job and maybe you're having a moment, or maybe there's something you don't understand, pull out that notebook, go to the section about working with development teams, and there's probably going to be something in there that you can take and you can apply. And at least maybe you'll have a little bit of guidance. And now that you'll have the context, you'll have a little bit of guidance on how to handle those situations. So all of the tips that I gave you on being prepared will take you a long way. Even if you're like, oh, well, I maybe could have thought of that. Like, make sure that you really write these down. You won't know everything, but as a new UX designer, like I mentioned, you're not supposed to, and you're not expected to. And that's the one thing that, as new designers, and even as someone who's just new at a new company, you're not expected to know how the inner workings of, how a company works or how a team functions. There's going to be a learning curve, and no one expects you to come in knowing how to work with an agile development team if you've never worked with one before. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who came today. I know it's like 8 a.m. for some people, 6 a.m. for some people. So thank you guys. And again, if you have any questions or additional information on working with agile teams or anything in general, feel free to email me, ashley@ashleyjanelle.com. As well as feel free to stay in touch in all these other ways. I think they put some links in the chat as well. But yeah, email, social media, definitely feel free. I have a UX group on Facebook. And yeah, definitely feel free to kind of stay in touch. I'm always eager to hear from you guys. And yeah, we can open it up to some Q&A. Hop back.
All right, there we go. It worked. So, as Thank you. That was really cool. I really enjoyed your presentation. I can tell that, I think many people can tell that you have a lot of experience talking to people. It's really, yes, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. I hope that everybody in the audience feels the same. And yeah, before I blabber on with my coffee, I'm just going to go to the questions that people have asked here. So actually, there's the 7 votes now from a question by Jana. She says, or she's asking, what tools are you actually using to document your ideas and design background?
To document your ideas and design background. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by design background, but what I will say is that the tool that I use to design is Figma, and that's also the tool that I use to do my documentation. So Figma, it's Figma, F is in Frank, IGMA, and it's a really powerful tool, and it allows you to, I mean, it's pretty industry standard at this point, but that's where I do all of my designing, all of my desktop work, mobile work, tablet work, and then that's also where I do all of my documentation. So I've actually created little sticky notes. Well, they're just boxes, but they're sticky notes. And then I, again, like I mentioned, have arrows that point to specific parts in my design. And then, you know, a blurb about, you know, exactly what it is that I'm doing. And then we also have created a little bit more of a thorough documentation process. So we'll say something like, you know, what is the trigger, which is what you're actually clicking on? What is the animation with that trigger? You know, so that the developers really have a clear cut understanding of, okay, I click here and then this is supposed to happen. And then what we also do in Figma is we prototype. So we actually animate everything, typically everything that we create. So if we're talking about animation, we will do it for them. So not only will they have the screens with the documentation written out for them, kind of spelled out for them, very clear cut, we also have it visually so that they can see it, because the animation and design part sometimes won't be written out in the features. That's something that designers have to do. But again, it depends on where you are. But it never hurts as the designer for you to go in there and do the documentation yourself.
Yes, and it can be easy, right? It doesn't have to be a fancy tool. It can be just,
Yes.
like you said before, a sticky note and...
Absolutely.
Okay, I just posted, for those of you who have missed it, I just posted the Figma tool.
Yes.
So you can all have a look. Great, thank you. All right, well, the next question. Oh yeah, have you had experience with pairing developers and design actually working together for a few hours on a specific feature, like sitting together in a room? That's how I understand it, and doing something together.
Yeah, so we have done some pairing. We actually, so kind of like what I was talking about, sometimes designers and developers tend to work past each other, even when we're working on the same team. We've done things when we pre-COVID where we actually sat together. So we had no choice but to talk to each other and bring each other in. And it wasn't so much us kind of sitting and working things out. But one thing we do is we always have one of our developers in all of our meetings. So they are there from, like I mentioned, they're there from the beginning, and they are the ones telling us, no, that we can't do that. You know, there's a technical limitation there. And it helps because, again, as designers, our options are limitless because we can just design them and create them, but developers are actually the ones that have to make it work. So again, bringing them in early and often, and you know, maybe if it takes you guys having to, you know, to relocate in the office or sit next to each other, or now, you know, maybe having them, you know, in this virtual world, in some of your stand-up meetings, always having a developer there, because there are always technical questions that come up, and it's just super helpful to have someone just give you an answer right there.
Yes, yes. Right. Yes, it's always helpful to just have it right away, right, without calling or meeting. Oh, a nice question. How long have you been in this field?
So I've been a UX designer for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of visual design work. So I've been a designer since 2009. And then, so doing a lot of visual design work, UI work. There was no term really. It wasn't UI or user interface. It was just like graphic design. So when I picked up UX, it was more about learning the research, how things work. Obviously, I understand how things should look, but the UX part of it was what was new for me. So I really enjoyed the UX research part of it, and really honed into that. I like UX research because I feel like it gives me a break from designing, and then kind of vice versa. So so the last 4 years, been a UX designer.
All right. Okay. So what else do we have? Oh, that's a nice question. Tommy is asking, how do you design when you do not have all the user research data?
Oh, that's a really good question. So how do you do that? Well, one thing that we've done is we have to sometimes go back to previous things that we know. So, you don't always have to have definitive answers or data for maybe this new product that you're working on, but maybe you can go back to some things that so a lot of times what we do is we go back to past platforms that we've designed, and we've said, okay, what's been some of the user feedback there, and then really try to apply that, because it doesn't change much. Sometimes in context it can change, but we want to really make sure that we're looking at things like old personas or old interviews or old usability reports, which is basically a compiled report of a usability test that we've done, where there are quotes in there, all kinds of data points. One thing, so if you're talking about actually a product that you're working on, maybe a project that you're starting yourself, one thing that I would do is I would try to start somewhere. So even if that's like a quick survey, so that you can get a starting point. You always want to have somewhere to start. You never just want to kind of start designing or putting something together based on what you say. So if you send out a quick survey, something where someone can give, or people can give you some answers, some quick and dirty responses, maybe some short answer, so that you can actually kind of get into their minds and give them the opportunity to kind of say how they feel. You want to always have a starting point. You can do things like competitive analysis if you're trying to, maybe figure out what other similar companies are doing. Competitive analysis, looking at other companies and really, putting, different tiers, like, okay, how much do they charge for this? What is their motto? What's their kind of, key tagline? What are their free services? What are their paid services? There are all kinds of like secondary research that you can do. We do secondary research all the time just by going on Google and reading what other people say, going on Twitter, reading what other people say. So there are a lot of different ways where you can kind of grab research without having thoroughly done it. But you do want to start somewhere.
Yeah. All right. Not just go from zero. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now there's another question, also very interesting. How do you deal or have come across companies that don't want to test their products with users?
That's a really good question. So, I'll say one of the things that I hone in on in my course is that you are learning UX the right way. So there is a process, kind of like the Agile diagram that I showed. There's a right way. Now, if you work with a team that skips over some of those points, that doesn't have anything to do with you, but you are learning the right way. There is a right and a wrong way to do something. You are going to work at companies that are not going to do things in the way that the process asks you to do them. There are going to be companies that will skip over steps. There are going to be companies that say, hey, we don't really have time to do the research, or we don't have time to revisit that design, or we don't have time to do whatever it is. You have to figure out what you can do in a short period of time. So going back and understanding the scope of work, how much time you have, what's asked, is super important. If you have a situation where they say, maybe we don't have time to test this, again, going back and looking at past research and seeing what that says. If you're designing something, they're saying, hey, we need this design, but we really don't have time to test it. Think about the things that you already know about what it is that you're designing. Go back to past, quotes and all the things that I, kind of said before about previous research, and really try to start there. You want to have some kind of a starting point. you also want to make sure that as you are working through, you are documenting the questions that you have. So when it is time to do research, you already have those and you don't have to go back and try to find them. That's a really, really good question. One thing that I will say is, most companies today understand the importance of UX. Unfortunately, you still have a lot of companies that don't. They don't put a lot of their resources, time, money into trying to find people, or maybe they just have one person. And it is kind of incumbent on you to push and to say, hey, we want to make the best product. We want to, it's also very expensive to have something developed and then go back and fix it, right? We can do something super easy and free and quick in Figma. But, you just want to kind of make sure that, people understand that and they understand the possibilities of what could happen if you're working somewhere where maybe they don't value it as much. But again, sometimes there is no time. And like I said, sometimes you just kind of have to roll with the punches and kind of do the things that I mentioned.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for the answer. All right. And Hannah is asking a question here. Do you have experience with even closer collaboration, having a very small cross-functional team and lesser hands-off?
So more kind of working in person, like workshops?
I would think that's what she means. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Those are really important. Obviously, we kind of have to change the way that we're doing those. Tools like Miro, whiteboarding tools are really, really important. So, sometimes you just really need to sit down and strategize. We tend to just start working and everyone kind of works in their individual silo. But yes, that's really, really important. You have to get the right people in the room. You have to get the product owners who have the knowledge of what needs to be built. You have to have the designers who know, obviously they're going to be the ones designing it. You got to have a developer in there. So yeah, definitely. I think those are really, really important. And again, they really give us a chance to explore the things that we haven't explored before. A lot of times we're so just trying to meet the deadline. We're trying to do the safe route when there's so many things that we haven't, thought about or done because we just really haven't had the time to do it, or we haven't really sat down. So workshops or, kind of in-person sessions or virtual sessions are a really great way to do those.
Yeah, because I think designers, what you just said before, right? Designers can think about anything crazy and the developers have to do it. And it's always good to know as a designer what's actually out there and what can be made and tailored by the developer. So it's great to have those meetings.
Definitely. I think it's Miro. I just put it down. Yeah, so that's a really great tool. Figma is also a good tool. It doesn't allow you to whiteboard, but it does have collaboration. So if you're ready to, actually start designing, that's a good one. But Miro is also a good one.
Yeah, we've worked with that, so that's very important.
Yeah,
visual is very important. Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no more answers, we're through with the answers and with the questions. I think they were really good.
Awesome.
And
really great questions.
Yes, and I think yes, I really liked your talk.
Thank you.
I hope that is there a course that is starting soon?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually always we take people on rolling admissions. So if you are interested, feel free to email me or check out my website, which I think was already dropped in there. But yeah, you can take a look at the course on my website. You can email me if you have any questions about the course or about, how to learn UX. We can talk about that as well. But yeah, no, thank you.
Great. Well, we wish you all the best for your course, for your business, for all the webinars you're still going to do. And we really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you.
Yes, we hope to see and hear you soon in one of these days. And yeah, for the attendees, thank you for attending. Let us know if you have any questions. The chat will still be available for a few days. And yeah, get the replay. The whole video will be available on YouTube as well. So check it out. And come to our next webinar on August 26th to listen about hacking. Crazy. All right. Thanks, Ashley, again. And all the best for you. And we hopefully talk soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.